A very good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Constitution Hill Debating League final. I'm not here to do quite a lot. I'm just here to initiate this ceremony and just to ask everyone to be settled down. The usual follows. Please just make sure that you minimize the talking. Let's minimize the moving. Should you need to leave the room, please avoid coming through the middle. Use the exits towards my extreme left and right. So, chairing this debate today will be Thabo Mngadi. Thabo Mngadi is not only a student at the University of the Witwatersrand, however, he's a highly ranking adjudicator in the South African Universities debating circuit and is also a member of the Wits Debating Union. So that's all I have to say, and at this point onwards, I'll hand over to our chair of the final panel, Thabo Mngadi.
Stable government has nothing to hide, and that's the way it should be. The whole policy that lies within implementing this motion suggests that no finding by the public protector will be kept away from the public. We, as side proposition, are supporting this, and throughout the speech, we'll be justifying why we support this, right? So, just to give a clear basis of today's motion, like in status quo, when a person lays a complaint to the public protector investigates and gives feedback and gives the results unless in certain circumstances. Now, what we burden side opposition to prove in today's debate is what are these circumstances and why they're so precious and significant that they should be kept away from the public, right? And side proposition today will prove to you that no information is too precious for the public to actually know about, as in the first place, they are the one who lay the complaint. The second speaker, and we are a government, and we stand for a government that understands the significance of public awareness. In today's debate, and the second speaker from side proposition will prove to her, will talk about how it plays a role in actually promoting a stable government, and I'll be talking about the awareness of the public. Moving on to my positive matter. Now, which was that I will be speaking about awareness, right? So as I've stated that the public is the one who lays the complaint. Why then should the public protector actually keep the very same information that the public actually wants to know away from them? Is it because they're hiding something, or are they actually protecting someone from who's doing something that he or she is not supposed to do? We as side proposition do not stand for this, and therefore that's why we stand for implementing this motion, right? So we find that when the public actually lays a complaint to the public protector, it's because they're concerned about something. There's something that they're concerned about. So then they take it to the public protector. So then they are believing that the public protector will actually give them the results and actually give them on how this situation will be handled. So now, why then does government say that the public protector should not give back this information? What is so precious about this information that it should not be given back? It should not be given to the public. What is so special about this that it should be kept away from the public? We feel that as soon as the public protector holds this information, is not fulfilling its role as a public protector, because its role is to actually investigate what the public is laying a complaint on, right? So if the public protectors then does not give them because of this certain situation in which they say it's not doing its job, because then it's keeping away information that the public actually wants to know. Yes, ma'am.
Ma'am, okay, we tie there are instances where people report, we tie that there's investigation, and then there's feedback. We tie that the solution is brought by. The public doesn't really have to know. We don't have to inform the whole country about it because a solution has been given.
But ma'am, then the public protector has to give back to information, has to give back has to give back information back to the public, even if that information might be detrimental. But the public has to know and what they're dealing with, right? Because that's what they want to know. Even if the information is not 100% accurate, they can still say that no, okay, this has not been proven to be 100% accurate, but this is but this is what's happening, and that's what we stand for, right? The public protector actually giving feedback back to the community, the same community who has a concern in the very first place, when we went to the public wanting answers, right? Wanting to be given answers. So we feel that, as I said, that we feel that as a public, if a public protector then decides to limit its responsibilities because of this certain situation, seems that it gives a perception to the society that the public protector is actually protecting someone, or that person is doing something that is illegal, and they don't want answers. And this will then lead the community to actually take drastic decisions because they want answers, right? So if answers are not given to them by the public protector, then they're going to search the answers for themselves, right? Which can then lead to things like violent protests, which we as side proposition do not support, right? We don't want a country that is violent, right? So we say that each and every information should be given to the community, at least a continuous update on what is going on with the matter that they on the matter which they laid a complaint on, right? Because that's what the public wants to know. They want to know what's going on. So it's their responsibility as the public protector to actually give them feedback. So we see that as soon as they stop giving that, the public will then take matters into their own hands, and which we don't want. And that's why we have a public protector in the first place, to actually speak for the people, and not for people to actually take matters into their own hands. So I've proven to you that if the public protector then limits its responsibilities and not actually tell the public all the information they need to know because of these circumstances, which I then asked for side proposition to prove to us why these circumstances are so precious and why they're so significant that they need to be kept away from the public, right? This is what we feel will award side opposition today's debate. If they actually tell us, no, this is the problem, and if we don't keep this information away if we don't keep away this information, it's actually going to harm them in this and that way. That's what we feel that as will win today's side opposition. It will win side opposition today's debate. With those words, I'd like to welcome side opposition to oppose the case. Thank you.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, what you have to understand is we can't be giving Tulima Donsela things which are not even in her work criteria, right? We can't expect Tulima Donsela to be going out there and investigating every single thing and telling every single unnecessary thing to society, because some of the things which we actually don't, there's actually a reason why we don't allow in current status quo for people, for Tulima Donsela to disclose of this information. Greetings, I here will be the first speaker of side opposition. Now, firstly, we feel that it's very significant as side opposition for you to understand what the responsibility of the public protector is, right? So firstly, we understand that the public protector has power as regulated by national legislation, being the law and the constitution. A, to investigate any conduct in state affairs or in the public administration in any sphere of government that is alleged or suspected to be improper or to result in any impropriety or prejudice, right? So secondly, we find that the responsibility of the public protector is to report on that conduct and take appropriate remedial action. And we have to understand that the public protector has additional powers and functions prescribed by national legislation, and they also do not have the right to investigate on court decisions, right? So I hope that helps. So before I go any further, I'd like to jump straight to my rebuttals. So they come up here. So side proposition comes up here and tells us that even if the information is not 100% sure, even if we're not sure, we're willing to disclose that information, right? We find that this is actually detrimental in itself in the sense that we have a side proposition which is actually supporting or promoting the idea of defamation of character. They didn't actually analyze what actually happens in current status quo. So what they're actually telling us is that even if someone just comes from society and reports that the next person did something something wrong, Thuli Madonsela should just go out there and tell the whole world that that happened, even if they're not 100% sure, right? That in itself is detrimental, and we here side opposition actually do not vow for such things, right? And secondly, they come up here and they tell us that they don't want protest. Later on, they tell us that what they're actually doing is allowing for society to get more information, right? We tell you that we here side opposition, they need to understand that the more information given to societies, the more likely we're to have these protests. So if you say that you don't want them to protest so much, then just limit that amount of information. So, okay, what we here side opposition's BOP, okay, we're going to prove that it's just unnecessary and current status quo works, right? So I, here, the first speaker of side opposition, will be looking at when do we value transparency and in which cases, and and our second speaker will be looking at the possible outcomes and current status quo analysis and show how it actually works, right? So I'd like to jump straight to my matter. First question being, when do we value transparency in society? This is our response, right? We here side opposition feel that we value transparency when the disclosing of that information to society is mutually exclusive to the problem getting better or being solved. So if it's not going to be solved, then it's just not necessary for us to disclose that information, right? So this will then take me to my first point, which is really, what we here side opposition are actually saying. We're saying that we would want government to actually release what directly harms society, not just anything, right? So here I would like to give an example. For instance, yes, we support issues where where the public protector actually speaks and discloses of things such as the Nkandla issue, because we understand that yes, it actually does affect society in the sense that that money was stolen and that money could have helped them in one way or another, right? So here, what we're actually saying is that as long as that thing directly harms society, and in us as the government telling them, it actually makes it much more better. It then gives them more. It gives them a way in which they can protect themselves. Then we would actually vow and support we would actually support the system, right? So secondly, we have to analyze what would have happened if everything that happened in South Africa was disclosed by the public protector, right? We tell you that this would have resulted in a lot of significant things losing their importance, in the sense that they would be diluted. It then means that per day, a person would probably be getting so many messages or so many things on the news that we're finding that some of them didn't actually matter, and in their knowledge, they wouldn't actually affect that person, right? So we find that that in itself is actually detrimental, because things lose their sense of significance. So would rather keep it to that information which society really needs to know, so that they can, in a way, protect themselves and know so much, right? So we find that, secondly, we find that it's actually sometimes unnecessary for us to take props side in disclosing of all things that the public protector finds, right? So we find that, for instance, if the rape issue had been disclosed of by the public protector, we find that it wouldn't have had any good impact on society, except for more strikes, right? We find that in current status quo, that rape issue was disclosed of by media and all that. But we find that if the public protector had actually disclosed of that information, what would have resulted is not in a Jacob Zuma who is no longer a rapist, right? So nothing would change. All that would have happened is everyone just knowing, everyone just protesting, everyone just having a distrust in our government system, and actually people now not trusting their government and thinking that government is all bad because of the public protector disclosing of anything. Any pure eyes? Okay, so I'd like to go on. So in conclusion, what we here side opposition are saying is that not everything can be solved by society pulling up a stunt. Not everything can be solved in us going and expecting the public protector to disclose of anything, right? Because you find that some things actually don't need divine intervention from the society in itself. We find that some things the government in itself can actually solve without the people actually knowing, because we find that most of the time it just results in bad things. It doesn't result in any good. It actually doesn't work. As I've given you so many examples of how people are going to protest, how people are going to have rather a bad perception about government itself. So what we here have a problem inside opposition's case, or what we expect from them, is for them to come up here and tell us and actually show the House how there are more benefits on their side when they actually disclose of everything, even those things which are necessary. And secondly, we actually want to understand by what do they mean by all public protective findings, because they just came up here and read the motion to us, but they were not that specific. So with that said, I would like to House to oppose.
A government that is stable won't have anything to do with problem things, right? Now we have these people called the public protectors, and can do much easier for the public to know what is happening in the government or in the world or in our country. It will help the society to know what is going on in the parliament, so that if the government does something negative in the public, and it should be exposed. For instance, if the society doesn't know what's going on in the parliament, obviously that thing will be exposed, but not all of it. And obviously the society will start searching for answers, and that thing can lead to protest and violence. With that, I introduce myself to the House. Without any waste of time, I would like to move on to my rebuttals. Now, the first speaker came and told us that it will not be beneficial to the society that it not be beneficial to the society that they must know everything what is going on in the government or in the parliament. But we tell you that it is, because in a society, I have the right to know what is going on, what is happening outside there in the parliament, because I will not be involved, right? Now, second rebuttal, I came across it, the society does not need to take everything in their own hands, but that with that, I'm gonna furthermore clarify in my positive matter as I go through. Now, moving on to my positive matter, how it plays role promoting a stable government. Like, a government will make sure that every step that it takes, it will be beneficial to a society and set a good name for it, so that the public protector do not disclose their name. If something happens, if the public protector finds out that there's something happening in the society, the public protector must have a right to expose those things, because, like I stated in my rebuttals, I have a right to know what is going on in my country, because I live and I am a citizen of that country. If, for instance, like I've stated, that if the society doesn't know what's going on, the society will have to take this matter for on their own hands. In their own hands, excuse me. Immediately when the government does something bad to the public, to the society, the public protector will tell the public, and they will be removed from their position, because they did something that is not in the law, something that is illegal. They will, by exposing government of doing wrong things, it will make government to be afraid to do negative things. Like I've stated, a government that is stable won't have any negative or problems with their government. So I'll be explaining what is a stable government. A stable government is a government that caters for the society, as my first speaker said that by the people, for the people. We, as a proposition, we allow the public protector to expose if there's something wrong, if there's something positive or negative. If the public protector discloses each and every information, then if the public protector discloses every information that the government does, then the society will come up with a solution, right? Let us say, for instance, the government did something bad. The society will have to come and show up with a solution to get to search and find the answers. This is what, not taken, ma'am. This is what I stated when I say I'll be furthermore clarifying in my rebuttals that the society that is as the first speaker of Timor Position said, the society do not take there's no need for society to take everything in their own hands. This is what I'm clarifying in this now. And what have I proven to you in this debate? That everything that the government does, the public protector must expose them, whether it's positive or negative. And everything
the government does bad, or maybe everything that the government does bad, and the public protector don't tell, the society will have to come up with a solution and show up and search and find their answers. With that, I would like to welcome the team opposition to furthermore oppose their points. With that, I close my case. Thank you very much.
We tie that the society doesn't always have the solution to the problems we face. And we tie if society is not going to contribute with the solutions, they don't need to know the problem that is there. We tie they don't need to know the problem that is there when we tie that the government within itself can find the solution within themselves. Greetings to the House. So in today's debate, I have 4 main questions to ask. One is when they told us is why does the info that we keep become so significant that it should be kept away from society, right? So we have 2 answers to this. One is that we believe that the important stuff are already being released in society, right? So we tie that when we have issues such as the Gandla issue that have been released, we believe that those are the stuff that affect society, and we believe that those are the stuff that already have been released. Secondly, we tie that society brings forth no solution to these problems, right? So we tie that they become so significant that we keep them away because society has no solutions to the problems. But furthermore, we tie that by releasing such information, it makes it worse for us as government, which will be explained within my speech, right? And then the second question is, do we report back the things that the public has complained about, right? So we tie that within those instances, yes, we do report back the things which society have complained about. The things that we don't tell them is the stuff society didn't bring about because which society hasn't complained about, because it doesn't affect them in any way. And then the third question which I have is, so does exposing all these problems in society make the country stable, which proposition keeps on telling us? One, we tell you that exposing problems doesn't make a country stable. Exposing problems gives people more reason to complain about the system within the country. And we tell you that these are the same people who don't have solutions to the problems within the country. Secondly, we tell you that it actually harms the perception of the country within itself, right? So we tell you that if we're going to be reporting back each and every single small problems which our country has, it doesn't boost our image within itself. It doesn't create a better standpoint for South Africa. We tell you that will be taken when I'm done with this. So we tell you it actually harms the perception of society or South Africa within itself when we tell you that what we actually do is expose problems and not solution within themselves. Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, we tell you that these problems are so small to the point that we don't believe we should worry and stress our society about it because we as government can solve it, right? This is what we're here to do. We're here to cater for the people, not stress the people about stuff we can solve. We don't think it's necessary to be telling people about stuff which is not going to help them in any way. And then the last question I have is, will government be afraid if we keep on exposing small problems? Ladies and gentlemen, we tell you that government is afraid in current status quo itself. We tell you that the fact that the Ngandla issue was released, the whole idea of corruption becomes a big issue in South Africa, and people are afraid of committing it, right? So we tell you that that's what we release, the important stuff, not the small stuff, because releasing the small stuff won't change anything. We tell you that when we release stuff as corruption, that's when government becomes afraid. And we tell you that we're already fulfilling that mandate when we release important stuff within our society, right? Now, moving on.
Your eye, ma'am.
No, thank you. Now, moving on to my matter. So we ask ourselves why we believe the current system actually works and why we support it, right? So we tell you that the people in current status quo know what they need to know, and that's what's important, right? So we understand that the right which has been looked at within this debate is the right to access information, right? So we tell you that all the information the people actually need has been given to them, and that's why we don't believe that we should be releasing all the nitty-gritties within the politics, because we tell you that the important stuff people already know. So we tell you that So we tell you that because current status quo actually works, we tell you that Thuli Madonsela is actually doing her job when she exposes when she exposes our leaders for doing what is wrong. We tell you that this is what we value. This is why the public protector was there in the first place. And we tell you that the public protector is actually fulfilling her mandate. Now, secondly, looking at the possible outcomes, right? So ladies and gentlemen, we actually analyze our current system. We actually analyze the people within society. We actually analyze how they react within society. Ladies and gentlemen, we tell you that big issues such as the Nkandla issues were released and people were complaining. Now imagine we were to release, we've proven to you that the public protector within herself actually fulfills her mandate, actually fulfills her job when she tells people about the important stuff, and that's what the people need to know. So we tell you that nothing that is important has been kept away from society, and that's the whole idea of a public protector within our society. Thank you.
By the people, for the people. We don't say that by implementing this motion, we don't say that this will make change, but it will bring a marginal change. If you know that you are doing good, then why do you have the problem if the public protector is disclosing what you are doing to the public? Then why do you have a problem if you are doing good? If you know that you are doing good, then which means that you don't have the problem by the public protector disclosing what you are doing in the parliament, right? So we feel that into today's motion, side opposition came and told us about the responsibilities of being a public protector. They told us that they don't have the right to disclose everything, but to tell you that we tell you that the public are the people who voted for that particular public protector, which they knew that that public protector would be a trustworthy person for their society, which he or she will cater to that particular society. Then they side opposition, we as side proposition gave them a burden to prove, to tell us why is it so special to keep this information away from the society. And we feel that they never replied to our burden of proof, which we gave to them, which we tell you that we see that side proposition doesn't feel that their case stands in this debate because we've given them a burden to prove, but they never proved that. If they were confident about their case, they could have come to the podium and proved what we've gave to them, which was telling us about why is it so special to keep away the information from the society. And they kept telling us that if the problem is so small, then they don't have to tell the society, which is the public, right? So we tell you that if the problem is small, then why don't they tell the public if that problem is small, which means that they won't protest because the problem is small, right? So the problem they're having is that they're not focusing on the big problems which they are releasing, right? Then we as side proposition are telling you that as I've stated that the society are the ones who votes for the particular public protector, right? So which means that if they came, we told them that the people are the ones who goes to the public protector and reports and wants to get more investigation from that particular thing. And then we feel that the public protector has to cater to its own society as they were chosen by its own society, right? Now they came, yes ma'am.
When we tell you that problems such as Nkandla are being released, what problems do you want to be released? Because we believe that those are the important stuff that society needs to know.
Right. We know that in each and every, when it comes to elections, the government comes to the media and tells the society to vote for them, right? To tell them, they keep telling them about the good things they are doing, but not telling them about the bad things that they are doing. You came here and raised the case that you say that if the thing of rape was raised, and then that would create a bad name for its own government, right? So let me tell you this thing. You've made me aware. You have made
made me alert that we should know what the government is doing, what's best for the government, and what detriments the government are doing. You told us about rape, which I didn't know about. So you made me alert. So this is the reason why we as side proposition feel that the public protector should inform its own society, right? So that problem is big, but it was never raised. This is the reason why we are implementing this motion today, so that other people would notice about what the government is doing good and bad, which we told you about in the first speech and the second speech, right? We feel that side opposition came and told us that if the problem is small, and then the government have to solve it by not letting the public to notice about that particular thing. And they told us that they cater for society, right? How can you cater somebody if you don't tell, if that particular person doesn't know what you're doing bad and doesn't know what you're doing good? So this is the reason why we're having the public protector to tell that particular person, which you're telling that you cater them. They have to know what's bad and what's good that you're doing. If they know that what is bad about you, and let us say, for instance, that problem is small, and then that person won't protest, right? They came and told us that this would raise protesting, and they also contradicted their case by saying that if the problem is small, and then the government have to solve it by their own, and they came and told us that this will raise protesting. And then we asked them, how can if they're saying that the problem is small, how can somebody protest for something that is small, which they're saying that the government has to solve it by themselves? We as side proposition feel that the society are the most fundamental people in our country, and we feel that they need to be catered, and they need to know what's good and what's bad about their government, right? Which is why we're saying that we need to have the public protector who will cater the society and tell them what's good and bad for their society, right? But with all those words, they came here and told us about Thuli Madonsela. Have you seen that? This is the reason why we are saying that Thuli Madonsela must fall, because she doesn't cater to the society. She doesn't tell the society what's good and bad. This is the reason why we're saying that we need to have a trustworthy person, which is a public protector, a trustworthy protector. This is the reason why we're saying that a society needs to depend on somebody. Let us say, for instance, the society tells the public protector to tell the particular government to develop on their skills, which is such as catering to the society and also giving them good things, right? Which is why we're telling that the society might come with a solution for a government, which a government can't come up with, which the society was voted off. With all those words, I would like to rest my case.
So side proposition is failing to understand what is currently happening under current status quo and what the public protector is already doing for us under current status quo, right? So what we as side opposition actually came up here and told you is that the public protector only tells us the things that are actually important and things that actually harm us directly. So what they come up here and tell us is that the public protector should say the important things. So this is what they come up here and tell us, is that they didn't know about the rape case. So what we're telling you is that it is about them being negligent enough not to know about what is happening, not the problem of the public protector, because we're telling you that firstly, the public protector did release this certain information. So we're telling you that the public protector does release this certain important information that we want them to actually release. So what we want to ask side opposition is that that is already happening. So what motion are they actually proposing in today's debate? So unless they prove to us what they are actually proposing, then they lose today's debate. So what we as side opposition actually stand for is that what they should be releasing is the things that are the things that are actually important to the society and directly affect the society, not the nitty-gritties that can already be solved by the government. But then here we also told you that the reason why people actually complain about these small things is because we gave you the analysis of the people that we have under current status quo. So we told you that people will always complain about everything that the public public protector actually tells
Point
them.
of
So we're
information.
telling you that if we actually pose a problem and tell the public the problem that we have, then the people are most likely to complain. No matter how small the problem is, then they are going to complain. So what we're telling you is that we're not getting a proper solution, but what we're actually getting is more chaos within our society. So then they come up here and tell us that Tulima Dansela is not
Point of
fulfilling her
information,
mandate, which is why we have this thing of Tulima Dansela must fall, which is not true, because it is within the same reason that Tulima Dansela is the best public protector that we have ever had within our history, right? So here, what we're actually telling you is that she has actually told us the most important things. She has told us the things that actually harm us directly, not telling us the things that are small, by actually and by this telling us everything that is happening on current status quo, this dilutes everything that is actually important to us. So then moving on to the clashes that I've identified. So the first clash that I've identified is, what is a stable government? So this is the question that our proposition poses to us. So firstly, they tell us that a stable government is when the society knows the problem. So therefore, when the society knows the problem, then they'll solve the solution. So firstly, we tell you that this is not true, because firstly, they did not prove to us how the society finds a solution, because all that we see under current status quo is that the society is only protesting and not giving us a proper solution. So what we're actually telling you is that the problem is not eradicated, but rather it is diluted when we now tell you every single thing. Because we're telling you that the most important thing is not seen as important anymore. Because firstly, we see that we have a lot of problems and we do not see the importance of one over the other. So then, what we actually prove to you is that we find that the problem is not eradicated when we actually tell the society. Because firstly, we told you about the rape case of Zuma. When the society found out about the rape case about Zuma, they only protested, but it didn't remove the mark of the statement that Zuma is a rapist. But they didn't give us clear analysis of how this problem that we have, the problems that we have, will actually be eradicated. So they come up here and also tell us that when the public knows, then they bring the solution, which I've just dealt with. So they also tell us that when the people know, then we bring more solutions and we bring a better solution. So this is false, because we get no analysis from side opposition. Because we're telling you that if we get more chaos and more protests, we're not getting to a solution faster, but yet we're diverging the problem, we're diverging the solution from where the problem is. So what I mean by this is that if we have a certain problem and the society is protesting, we are most likely going to fix what the society has broken down. We're not going to fix the problem that we have actually given to the society. So what we're trying to tell side proposition here is that they should give society what is most important and something that they can actually help us fix, so that we can actually get to the problem. Not the things that they cannot help us fix and stuff like that. So then the second clash that we actually find is the necessity of us actually releasing such information. So they come up here and they give us the problem that if the society poses the question, then they deserve to know. So we're telling you that sometimes telling the society is actually detrimental, both to the society and to the government. So what we're telling you here is that even though the public actually poses the problem, we give them the solution, but the problem that we don't want to give to the society is one that they're not going to help us find the solution for, right? So then they come up here and also tell us that they don't want more problems, they don't want more protests, but even if this certain information that we release to the public is not 100% sure, then it is fine for us to just release it to them. So what we don't understand within side opposition's analogy is how they believe that there won't be more problems if we release something that we're not so sure of. So what we tell you is that it is much better for us to actually do more investigation and find a solution without us involving the public, as they bring more chaos to us and they don't give us a solution that is much better. And we believe that secondly, this promotes defamation of character if we now start releasing information that we're not 100% sure of. And this is what we shouldn't be doing, and something that we shouldn't be standing for. Yes.
Ma'am, referring to your case, you're saying that if things are small, they shouldn't be disclosed to the society, right? But then what if the small problem grows to be bigger?
But ma'am, we're telling you that if this certain, the definition of a small problem that we actually gave you is a problem that we already found a solution for. So this certain problem will not grow to become bigger if you have already found a solution for. So then, they also come up here and tell us that when the society knows the problem, they are most likely to find the solution. Firstly, this doesn't happen with the problems that we actually give to the society, so therefore they do not prove to us how the society actually finds the certain solution. So we are a side opposition that actually believes in giving the society what they need to know, telling the society what actually harms them directly, not telling the society what we have already found a solution for. So what we as side opposition actually stand for is a society that doesn't cause more chaos for us, but a society that knows what they need to know and actually give us a proper solution to the problems that we have. Thank you.
An old Madala discovers that he lost his shoe and he suspects that it's Jacob Zuma, so he goes and reports the matter to the public protector. What side proposition is actually saying that we should do, or the public protector should do in that case, is go high and tell the whole world, right? But we here, side opposition, are actually against that. So, greetings again. I here will be the reply speaker of side opposition. So, what we were expecting from side proposition is for them to tell us what kind of information are they talking about. When you say all information, what do you mean, right? And secondly, they fail to understand that what they were actually trying to propose is what is actually happening in current status quo. We tell you that in current status quo, Jacob Zuma can still be exposed, right? So we don't actually buy into all of their speeches when they come up here and go about telling us that everyone should be exposed, the public protector should say all things, right? So in today's debate, I noticed two main clashes. The first being the necessity, the second being what actually happens after that is done, right? So onto my first clash, which is the disclosing of information. So side proposition decided to come up here and out of the blue tell us that what we should do is just disclose all of the information, right? Because it's so necessary. We need a stable government. We're in dire need of such a good government. So the only way in which we can get that is for us to say everything to the people, right? But contrary to that, we here side opposition came up here and said, okay, wait side proposition, because that's not the only solution. You don't have to disclose all information to society, especially if them knowing is not mutually exclusive to us solving the problem, right? Because they fail to understand that when, in their case, there's actually more detriments in the sense that we're going to have more protests from people, unnecessary ones, by the way. And as we said, there will be dilution of important information as it will be put alongside with all the other unnecessary things like the Madala's shoe. That point automatically falls to side opposition, right? So the last but not least being the possible outcomes, right? So they came up here and decided to tell us that when the society knows, we're less likely to have problems, meaning that there's actually going to be more solutions, right? But we came up here and said, no, it is actually not true, because you find that when society knows, as we said, that is actually not mutually exclusive to the problem being solved, in the sense that it's better if we as government actually keep it knowing very well that we have the solution to it, because you going out there and announcing every single thing that happens is not going to solve the problem. Because they fail to understand that point also falls to side opposition. So the reason why we hear side opposition win today's debate is because we understood very well that we understood what side opposition didn't understand, which is we'd rather keep or stick to current status quo instead of changing it, because you're making it worse. Thank you.
What is so precious about this information you choose not to disclose to the society is what we had asked. What is the harms of not disclosing? What are the harms of actually disclosing this information is what we are side opposition to prove in order for them to win today's debate. Now into this debate, we feel they have lost. Because they were not able to prove this in the following ways. Right? So firstly, they came and told us the problems that are not mentioned to the society. The problems are so small, so the society does not need to know about these problems, right? So this is where we tell you that. So if these problems are so small, why then does government choose to not to disclose this problem? Because if they're so small, then they will cause no harm to society. If the society actually know about these problems, here again we tell you that if they're so small, then they will cause no harm in society, right? Here they tell us that the harm is that if the society knows about these problems, there will be more protest. But this is where we countered this by telling you that we will have more protest if the government decides to actually not disclose this information, because then people want answers and people will go to extremes. If there's a chance that people will actually go to extremes to actually answer, to get answers regarding these problems, right? So them telling us that it will actually encourage protest means that these problems are actually significant. Yet again, they contradicted themselves, because they first closed that these problems are small. Now they're telling us if the public knows about these problems, then again it will cause chaos. This means that again these problems are actually significant, right? They're actually things that the society has to know about, right? So we as Side Proposition stand for the people and actually stand for the people and by the people, right? So we feel that the people actually have to know what's going on around them, because the decisions that are made in Parliament actually affect their lives, right? So these small problems in which they protect can actually have a big way of affecting these people, because they themselves said if they release these problems, it will actually cause chaos in the society or communities. Right? So they came and told us that these are the kind of problems that government can solve on their own. Fine, okay, they can agree, well, the government can solve them on their own. Then they should tell the people that this is the kind of problem we have and this is how we're solving it. So there will be no protest after all, right? So the problems of protest is solved after all, because then because if the government has a solution to the problem, in which they has a problem into the problem, then the public won't result into protest, because they've seen that the government has actually.
Thank you very much to everyone for coming through once more. Welcome to the very last debate at the Constitution Hill Debating League. This is the senior final, and chairing this panel this time around is Mfuma Bamuza. He is not only a highly ranking speaker, not only in South Africa, but is also a member of the Wits Debating Union, and he will introduce the rest of his panel. Again, normal things, please make sure that you exit using my extremes on the left or on the right. Avoid moving along these passages. Also keep the talking down. Let's just try to maintain as much order as possible without wasting any further time. Over to you, Mfumo.
So, on my panel, we have Silo Ngube, and then at the far end, we have Katleho Mantata? No, okay. We have Professor David Bilchitz, and we have Mr. Jeris Banda, and we have Rachel judging the senior final, right? So as you can see, it's a very big panel. So can we please, by all means, just try to keep it quiet and keep it down so that all the judges can hear, right? The motion is, it has an info slide, okay? I have prepared for my death and have made it clear that I do not wish to be kept alive at all costs. I repeat the info slide. I have prepared for my death. I have made it clear that I do not wish to be kept alive at all costs. These are the words by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Right. This House supports the right to die. Without wasting any further time, let's call upon Tshepo Mofokeng to open up today's debate. Here.
Nelson Mandela asserted that he has fought years of racial domination and that he feels that democracy is an ideal which he is prepared to die for. Side proposition is the side that thinks that the decision to die, the active decision to take your own life is something that we support. How do we define the right to die? We say that it's two things. First, it is the decision to take your own life. So that is things such as suicide. Secondly, it is actively placing yourself in instances where you are likely to die. So it is things like protesting in war-torn countries where you are more likely to be shot from the back than you are to be shot from the front. We support people putting themselves in situations where they are likely to lose their lives. How do we define this house? We say that this is states and governments that rule over people. the criteria in today's debate. In what instance do we support a decision? We think that it's in an instance where we think that that decision is principally justified, but secondly, it's in a decision where we think that the pursuit of that decision is beneficial, which also tends itself to be my case in today's debate. I'm definitely going to talk to you about the principle and why we think that in principle we should support the decision to take your own life. We think that what we are forced to defend in today's debate is why we think that humans should be allowed to do what they please, because the decision to take your own life extends itself to that. What we really have to justify here is autonomy. That is, the ability to fully define yourself, the ability to make decisions about your life, and the ability to live according to those decisions. The importance of this argument in this debate is that we think that the decision to take your own life or the aspiration to die is a part of you defining how you want to live. Before that, a few points of context. Why are people likely to want to take their own life? And you see that it's three things. One, that they don't enjoy the lives which they lead, but secondly, that death is just like an aspiration to them. They see it as a goal, or death as a means to an end, just like Nelson Mandela's thought that it was a means to, say, get the apartheid government to move. So why do we think that autonomy, the ability of human beings to fully define themselves, why do we think that that is justified? We say that it's because we think that life is meaningless. So the distinction between objects and human beings is that objects have a defined purpose. That is, the spectacles on my face have the defined purpose to help me see all of your faces, whereas human beings are subject. That is, that they don't have any defined purpose. The reason why that is important for this debate is that it means that we should be allowing human beings as much autonomy as possible. Since there is no standard or there is no definition or like a ideal life that human beings should live to or should aspire to, we think that they should be allowed as much autonomy as possible. Secondly, we think the second implication of this is that this autonomy and this ability to define themselves should not be imposed upon. That is, other human beings cannot take away your ability to define yourself. That is why we don't allow human beings to kill each other, but also states cannot take away your right to define yourself. We think that is particularly important. It's not just a consideration of why we owe them autonomy, but it's a consideration of why we think states in particular can't impose on their autonomy. So there we think that autonomy is principally justified. Why is it that we think the decision to take your life is a facet of your life and therefore subject to your autonomy? That is, why do we think that it is subject to your ability to define yourself and we should support it as a right? We think that the decision to take your own, life and death are just equally facets of your own life. We think that autonomy is like the ability to define every element in your life, since death, the duration for which you live, is just as much an element as the decision to live at a certain place. We think that you should be allowed to make decisions over it. But secondly, we say that being alive is a circumstance, but it's not the entirety of existence. That is, it's like, we think that by virtue of it being like a particular facet of life, we say that existence is just like being there in and of itself, right? Be it that you're alive or you're dead, we say that existence is just like existing in a physical space. We say that like being alive, actually breathing, is like a form with which you could live. And we think that like you should be allowed to opt in and opt out of particular elements of your existence. But I'm about to finish my argument, I'll take you in a second, right? The last thing that we tell you is that like autonomy, like bodily autonomy and the ability to fully rationalize, extends to like the form in which you live. So we'd say that the decision to live 6 feet under the soil in a beautiful casket after a ceremony is as much a legitimate decision as the decision to wake up every morning, get a job and work. We say that those are different forms in which a human being exists and they are equally legitimate. Go.
So why is this autonomy only going to be further maximized if dying becomes inherently a right? Why is dying not only okay if it's just legal?
So we think that like the argument that we're making is that in principle we have an obligation to to support the decision for people to kill themselves. What we're doing here is justify like why people have full autonomy and why that autonomy extends to taking their own life, and by virtue of that we think that in principle we should be making it like a right. So like that is the part of the debate that is important. But lastly, why do we think that the decision to die should be immune from impositions? Because we understand that we don't allow human beings, in some instances we do limit the freedom of human beings, right? So it's those instances where we see that their own freedoms impose on the freedoms of other people, and it's like in a bunch of other instances. Why do we think the decision to take your own life is immune from those instances where it is legitimate to impose on an individual's decision? One, we think that like no decision is free from influence. influence. That is, the decision to wake up in the morning and say have like 8 glasses of water is based on the influence that that's the only way that like you'll be fully healthy, right? So we'd say that what is important when people make decisions and what we consider to be legitimate decisions are decisions where people give meaningful consent. We think that the influence, so the circumstances that make a person think that life is the only avenue to pursue, we think that those things serve as influences. People give meaningful consent. They don't take away the ability for those individuals to completely rationalize. And just like on a note of context, like we think that this debate speaks to human beings with full capacity to rationalize. So it doesn't speak to people with the mental incapacity to make rational decisions, just like on an important note of context. The second reason why we think that like we shouldn't be imposed on people's choices, especially the choice to die, is that like no metric should exist to evaluate the decisions of human beings. That is, that we think that like the reason why we think that no metric should exist to evaluate the goodness or the badness of decision is that whatever metric we employed would be arbitrary. Why is this true? We think that like what is good and what is bad is like subjective definitions of what good things are and what bad things are. We think that like by virtue of the fact that those definitions depend on who you are and what kind of life you've lived and the kind of experiences you have, all those things mean that your definition of what is good and your definition of what is bad is like is something that is arbitrary, right? So we think that in that instance it means that like an attempt at imposing a metric by which we evaluate decisions and therefore taking the decision that individuals don't have the right to kill themselves by virtue of it not being a good decision, we say that that metric is flawed, that metric is arbitrary, that metric shouldn't be employed to try to disallow human beings to act a certain way. Lastly, why do we think that states have a direct obligation to act in this manner? This is the last bit of analysis and particularly like half as important. We'd say that like states have an obligation to do 2 things in particular. That is, to allow individuals, like to maximize the freedom of individuals, to allow individuals to be what they are. We think that how this not being a right, like the ability to want to take your life not being a right, how it imposes on it being like a freedom is that like we think that the action itself is delegitimized, right? We think that like states also go as far as to set policies in place that don't allow you to reach a point where you take your own life. So we do things like assign psychologists if we think that you are likely to kill yourself. We think that by virtue of it not being a right, we think that states can then justify attempts at keeping you from killing yourself. We want to remove that. But lastly, we think that we defend the attempt alone. I've never been prouder to propose.
What side proposition has successfully done is confuse this House. Because ideally, the only existent case that they have is the idea that we live in a utopian society where every choice is good, but more importantly, where governments are not held to account for their people. We think what Tsepo failed to address is the direct obligation that governments have, even beyond giving these people the freedoms that they're so entitled to. With that in mind, we've got two burdens to prove as side opposition, right? That one, that the right to die is constitutionally unjust, but secondly, that dying is relatively better when it's not a right. The yardstick then becoming which side best proves the extent to which dying can be a supportable right. And the criteria, we completely reject the side of the House criteria because it's simply generic, right? The debate actually lies on when would we support the right to die. So firstly, when death is necessary specifically as a right, but secondly, when it betters a system of accountability because of democracy, especially with regards to introduction, but lastly, when it consolidates other rights. Because ideally, a large amount of this side proposition's case simply does not address that when you make things rights, right, especially when it's going to be extreme, you must understand that there are other rights that should be involved. With that in mind, we've got 2 points to prove this, right? As the first speaker will look at why the right to die does not fit the criteria to be supported. My second speaker will therefore look at how the right to die is extensively harmful to the individuals and society. But before that, my rebuttal. And my rebuttal question is, does side proposition really prove to us that the right to die is something worth the support, even beyond the very confusing context, right? And the first thing we must understand and first thing we must look at is this obligation. So where does government's obligation actually lie? I do side proposition's job for them here. So the first thing we must understand is that especially when your introduction is about Nelson Mandela and fighting for democracy, you must understand that democracy places a system where we vote in a government in order for them not only to make decisions that protect the life that they're supposed to give us, but more importantly, we vote in for a government that is there to ensure that every other right consolidates that of life. However, what they don't understand is that if you're going to speak about autonomy, you must understand that autonomy is limited all the time. That's why you have the freedom to make a choice, but that choice is limited and subjected to something that could nudge those societies and nudge you as an individual in the right direction. So that's why I have the ability and choice to do debating, but I don't have the ability or the choice to do debating only to promote things like propaganda. But even if this analysis did not exist, right, we still tell you about the social contract which extends extensively, especially when you look at things like life and death. What we must understand is that side opposition is not against, or side opposition is not saying that death is something that's wrong or should be prosecutable. Side opposition is saying that it does not deserve to be a right. Why does it make it very different from what side opposition is opting for? Because we tell you, when you make something a right, you make it absolute. So this means that we may never actually go against the idea of individuals that opt into dying simply because their poor boyfriend broke up with them, right? We tell you that this is something that you're born with because it is a right. Just like life, there is no question as to there is some value or not. So we tell you that this is the way the debate lies. So does it mean that we're going to give individuals the right to death, especially since it's absolute? But more importantly, do we have a better ability of holding individuals accountable should they fail at the attempt? But more importantly, right, we must also understand that when you talk about meaningful consent, it simply does not stay true to the right to death that you give these individuals. Because you don't consent to life, right? You don't just sign an agreement and be like, yo, doctor, I want to live today. No, this debate is about the idea that you are born with this right. You are born with the right to die. Therefore, we may never question, should you want to die, we may never question your motives. We think that this is where the debate lies. So yes, they can tell us about choice, right? We tell you choice is something that is existent all the time, but why is this choice conditionalized on the right to dying being a right? So we tell you that the right, just because something is a right, does not necessarily mean it's right. Some rights are wrong. With that in mind, my thesis then becomes that the right to die devalues all constitutional rights and values. Because what we must understand, and this is the context that was largely missed, right, in a moment, is that unlike the right to life, right, the right to death simply does not have any other rights contingent upon them. So with the right to life, you've got the right to choice, which is contingent upon them, expression, which is contingent upon them, and other rights, right? And I'll further continue with my matter, yeah.
We have rights in place to protect freedom. Why does the right to life then not protect your freedom to also take your own life?
Wait, so why does death become a freedom is what I don't understand. Because it's something where we must understand that to some degree, right, it's not something we can control, but should we have the ability to control it, we don't want it to be a choice. You know why? We don't want it to be a right, because it means that we may never question your motives. We are, as a government, are people that are supposed to protect you. So if Jomo wants to dump you and you're dying, right, and you want to die, we simply allow you to die because, well, you're born with that right and we may never question it. This is the essence of my analysis, which is simply missed. But continuing, right? This is why I do cite propositions job for them extensively and tell you what happens when something is an actual right. So one, we think that it's given to every human being without a condition, especially by virtue of living. So this means that dying becomes an immediate alternative to life. However, there's no system of accountability then, because unlike life, right, we have other rules that actually make sure that we protect that. That's why we'd hold individuals accountable for trying to tamper with someone's right to life. But more importantly, there simply is no obligation to maximize utility of the right to life, because there is an alternative right, which is that of death. But extensively, we also tell you that human rights are initially interdependent. So this means that the right to die contradicts all other rights because they are aimed at improving the living conditions. This means that if individuals have the ability to actually opt in for death, right, especially because we may never question their motives, we don't give an incentive for governments to fix the current system that would want individuals to actually die. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about those Syrian kids that want to kill themselves simply because they don't want to be a burden on their current government or the government that they're most likely to move to. We think that this is where the debate lies. This is analysis that they largely missed. But more importantly, right, we tell you that other rights become redundant then because we don't need them to set a standard on the acceptable life governments should provide if dying eradicates their purpose. So this means that governments don't have the ability to provide water and sanitation, because then people can choose to die because their living situation right now is not something that they actually desire, instead of obligating governments to create the change that they're supposed to. So comparatively, and that they could argue and say that this is the only means for governments to wake up. No, Governments are simply there to protect that right. So if this means that you're given this right, then they simply have to protect the right to death and never to improve the living conditions. This is the problem. But more importantly, it becomes legally actionable. So this means that the line between murder and the choice to die becomes narrow, because you can kill someone and claim that they wanted to die. The problem about this, ladies and gentlemen, is that we can never know when death is actually something murder or the killing of individuals, making it worse for murder trials to actually occur, especially in the sense that we hold individuals accountable. Extensively then, for a democratic society that actually has the social contract theory, we may never get the ability for a justice system that correctively holds individuals accountable. But more importantly, if dying by choice without it being right happens, we can question the rationality. Unlike that proposition telling us that all these choices are rational, we're telling you, what about minors that choose to exercise these rights? Because ideally, no one is going to tell them otherwise, because this right is absolute. So we also tell you that even when rights come with responsibilities, what responsibility comes with the right to die? So is it, well, you should choose to die in a very safe manner, or you should choose to die out of the public's eye? Ladies and gentlemen, this is the practicality of the matter that Tsepo and his team failed to address. Our opposition wins this final. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, on the precipice of wanting to take your life, you are at a place where you override the natural instincts of a human being to survive. That is, whenever you try to commit suicide and you have a way to opt out, you will opt out, because humans naturally always want to survive. So on that precipice where you want to kill yourself, it is the only aspiration you have in your mind, the greatest aspiration you have in your mind. It is the way out of your troubles. And we think, as side proposition, if you have the greatest aspiration and you have the freedom to achieve it, we ought to make it right. I'm proud to be proposing in today's debate. So before I get into my substantive, I'll be further reproving in principle why we deserve to be making this specific right a right in our Constitution. Let me get into some bits of rebuttal, right? So before I get into my rebuttal, it's worth mentioning that the case that we get from side proposition thus far is not as substantive as you thought it would be. So Kula makes a lot of what ifs and what could haves and possibilities, but does not contain the principles that we contain that Tsepo said in his own matter in his first speech, right? So we think it's problematic when he gives you a lengthy 4 minutes of analysis in terms of autonomy for only Kula to ignore it and just sideline it, right? We think that's very unfair. But I think, ladies and gentlemen, let's take note of that as I go to my rebuttal, right? So the first thing she wants to contend with is like the right to die and why she wants to negate it, right? Three pieces of response here. So one, right, we think that it's very hard for her to tell us that, well, minors are going to start committing suicide and Jomo's girlfriend is going to commit suicide because Jomo dumped him, right? We think from the intro that I gave you alone that the precipice of suicide is that you want to end your life, you don't want it anymore, and it's very tough. We think that not even the idea of some girl dumping me would bring me to that precipice, but we think that if you do reach that precipice, you are illegitimate in reaching it because that is your way out as an autonomous human being. We think that if you want to reach it as a person, you think that that's your only way out in life. We think that we'd appreciate it, right? Then the second thing is, right, we think that, well, it's arbitrary for her to say that what is a problem and what isn't a problem. For her to say that being dumped is not a major problem and should never kill yourself over it, we think that that's really unfair. She's not the only person to define that as a cause of suicide. And that is so arbitrary. People commit suicide for different reasons. We should never be judging them for it because she's no moral compass of ours. We think that everybody should be in a position to determine what they want to commit suicide for, right? Because of the principle of autonomy itself. But then lastly, yes, to reinforce that particular principle of autonomy, right? We think that's really important. So then she comes up with this argument of accountability. So the main question here we need, she's like, if you ever have a right like this, you need to have accountability. We say, well, we don't have to have, because she doesn't give us substantive as to why we need accountability for a specific right for you to die. We don't think that's any type of substantive. We don't value it, right? So then she has this point of like contradiction of rights, right? So we don't really understand this point because one, we don't really get substantive, but let's argue what we really got from Kula, right? So we think that when you say that the right to die is a contradiction of every other right, that means that she says that, well, it's not worth it because it would just be useless to those other rights, right? It would end the usefulness of those rights. We think, yes, we agree. Why? Because, ladies and gentlemen, at the point at which you want to die, all those other rights are useless to you in any specific case. So it's no contradiction. It's maximizing your own specific freedoms. So we value that because if if we think that at that point those rights are useless to you, so they have no value, so there's no contradiction in that specific incident, right? Then she gives us like nuance and analysis about like we're going to be improving conditions and whatever. So we don't really value it. Like already, like I've said, you at a point where you want to die. There's no improving situations for us. We think that at that point we're just willing to die. That's all we're going to keep, right? Last one. The justice system, right? So for some freaky reason, some people are going to commit suicide to escape the justice system. Well, that already happens. We don't think we're going to engage with that anyway. Let me get into my substantive. But before that, yes, cool, I'll take it.
What you don't understand is the nuance of the analysis that when you make something a right, it becomes absolute. However, when it's just a choice, there's a better system of accountability. Like in Britain, when we hold individuals that try to commit suicide, but we hold them to account because ideally it's something that they're against.
Yes, so the response to that specific argument is going to be my whole matter. This is where I'm going to be talking to you how the state can never have the right to prevent you from ever committing suicide, because the state actually owes you the obligation of fulfilling your right to die. So we think that the state actually owes you the right to die, and I'm going to be analyzing that point further, right? So we think that in any specific instance, nobody should be preventing you from committing suicide, even if it's a state. First point of analysis, right? So we think that the state is an institution, like Kula analyzed, that we live in a democracy, and that's why Mandela was really relevant. We live in a democracy, but the important thing about democracy is that it's a construct of all of us. That is, we all construct democracy as we see fit. That the government is the will of the people. So when the will of the people is to die, what then happens of government? That means government must then facilitate this specific process. That means government must then make a way. So we think that we also base laws on the fact that of the will of the people. So we don't want rapists, so we make laws in order to avoid that. We don't want people to kill us, so we make laws to avoid that. When the will of the people, like I've already mentioned, says that I want to kill myself, or we recognize that there is aspiration to kill, then we must facilitate that specific process, and we think that that is the role of a democratic government and the role of the state as a construct of the will of the people, as a construct of representation of the people. That's really important. So at a point at which you on-side proposition, that's an illegitimate government, a government that does not allow you to maximize your own beliefs and your own freedoms, a government that stops you from maximizing what you think is important to you. So in an instance where someone wants to die because they're in an instance of euthanasia, for example, where I'm in pain, you're Desmond Tutu, you're at the precipice of dying, you don't want to be stopped from dying, who is the state to prevent you from reaching your greatest aspiration? In any specific case, they are not legitimate to do so, because as Tsepo analyzed, they do not have the kind of autonomy over you that we think is wrong, right? We think that autonomy should never be contravened by anyone, let alone government itself, which is meant to be representing you. I think that's illegitimate. No, cool, I will not be taking any more of your points, right? So then this is really important to take notice of. So we think that in any specific instance, it's going to be illegitimate for us to do any of those things, right? So we think that governments should, one, be able to represent everybody, but two, represent the wills and beliefs of other people, right? So we think that the majority of people then recognize, like we do in society, that suicide is something that happens in society, and there are instances where people really want to get out and opt out of life itself, then government should be doing that. We're seeing in status quo that construct is not happening, we don't value it, right? So we think that, one, because we didn't opt in life, we should have the option to be opting out, but also the fact that you would be preventing me from letting go and going into a later stage of life, we think that is illegitimate, right? The second point of analysis then comes, that we think that the state also has an obligation, and this is where Tsepo really touched at the end of his speech, which is really important, right? So we think that from that sentence above, that the fact that the state owes you the ability to maximize every other freedom that you have, and that from that sentence alone, it should tell you that the state also has a responsibility and obligation to maximize this specific freedom itself, right? So we think that when government affords you the right of autonomy in the specific democracy that we live in, it should be responsible for making sure and protecting those individual freedoms that it has granted you as a democratic state. So we think it's illegitimate for them to be infringing on those specific rights, right? So, but to come to some practical analysis, right, just to make it a bit real, in any instance where someone is willing to die, you have to understand that they've given up on life, that life is too tough to carry on. When you want to keep them alive with the kind of possibility that you're going to be helping them, we don't think that's ever legitimate or ever practical to say. Because you think at those specific instances where someone is in pain from the suffering of, let's say, a terminal illness, they just want to let go of life. You think it's illegitimate for you to keep them alive. They need to be let go. I'm very proud to propose this motion.
Ladies and gentlemen, democracy is not granting people the right to do whatever they want. Democracy is giving people the right to do something that is objectively good for them and at the same time protecting them from oppression and giving them the right to vote. That is democracy, not giving you the right to die. Let's talk about the reality of the situation. This is where I'm going to get in depth into rebuttal. The first thing they talk about is autonomy. And here they say autonomy is important because a lot of people can tell the difference between what's good and what's bad. But this is objective to everyone's, this is objective to each individual. We tell you, yes, that is definitely true, but however, this sort of autonomy is something that we don't support. Why is this so? The obvious rebuttal we're going to give here is the fact that yes, government can take away autonomy at any time they feel like, and also simply because of the social contract theory, which, by the way, when you're dead, does not apply. Secondly, this thing that is not so obvious is the fact that there is no maximum utility for that particular right. Why is this true, ladies and gentlemen? This is simply true because of the fact that when you're dead, ladies and gentlemen, yes, we did allow you to die, but simply there is no intrinsic bigger picture in terms of we gave you that right, but we've maximized it in the light that now people know that with that, we can maximize that right, and eventually, ladies and gentlemen, you are actually in a democratic state where we can support anything that you want. That is not the reality of the world that we live in, ladies and gentlemen. That is not true. Sit down. Secondly, let's talk about the obligation of the state. This is what they bring up, and this was their major point as opposition. They gave us 2 points under this. The fact that the state has the obligation to allow all freedoms to exist, which, by the way, is utter bull. Secondly, they tell us no, that the state has the obligation not to stop you from suicide. We have a couple of responses to this. Secondly, the state always has to stop you from committing suicide. Why is this so? This is simply because of the idea that the state has the obligation to simply give you a better standard of living as the last alternative. But when we give you this particular right, this means that we diminish that very same alternative. This simply means that the state has no chance of bettering that very same life before they can actually, of bettering that very same life and actually doing something. That simply means that we have not done anything. The state's obligation is therefore flawed in that instance. Secondly, we're going to tell you that freedom isn't always granted, ladies and gentlemen. And as Randfontein, you should understand this by now. We tell you we don't allow you the freedom to go and kill someone. We tell you if you're a suicide bomber, you have the right to die. You can go ahead and blow people up. The problem with this right, ladies and gentlemen, is that there is no accountability. That is why states do not grant some rights in many instances. And that is what proposition does not understand in today's debate. The third thing I'm going to respond to is the fact that they tell us that everything you do in the end is for you to die. Yes, that is very true, but why does that have to be conditionalized on the fact that this has to be a right in the first place? And we tell you that they don't actually debate on the reality of the spectrum in today's debate. The last thing I'm going to rebut is this whole idea of they tell us here, at the point where you die, ladies and gentlemen, all of these rights then become useless. Excuse me. Of course that's what happens, ladies and gentlemen. Especially if you're going to grant someone the right to go and die and go and kill themselves. You haven't given them a chance to actually deal with their problems in many instances. And I'm going to show you in my matter why this right in itself, ladies and gentlemen, is a right that is not applicable in the modern world in itself. Let's move on to into my positive matter, and I'll take you in a moment. And what I'm going to show, my positive matter is simply focusing on the fact that in the instance where Kula's matter did not stand, let's just show you why this right in itself is impractical in the first place. Yes, sir.
What you need to respond to is my matter about when it's legitimate to impose on freedoms and why that doesn't.
So you didn't have any matter. I just responded to it in the fact that you told us that it was about the government's obligation. You told us about how these people have autonomy. I responded to that. You need to listen. The thing I'm going to talk about here is why the right to life is extensively harmful to those individuals and the society at hand. And what we're going to look at here is the simple fact of what this right would do to humanity in itself. Let's firstly look at let's firstly look at the idea of the fact that it takes away the essence of living, both figuratively and literally, ladies and gentlemen. And that is the reality here. We tell you firstly, it defeats the basic purpose of living, and it's on two basic morals that are universal in today's debate. The first one being that you live to constantly better ourselves, even when we don't have very good conditions. For example, if you are poor, you strive to actually live a life that is better than the one you are living now. But the second moral here is that we live to better the environment for the person who's coming next. These are universal morals that each and every human, which by the way are basic legislation, that each and every human has to achieve to some extent. We tell you, therefore, by supporting or granting this right, you don't actually achieve those very basic morals in any sort of way. We tell you there's no aspiration to achieve those morals whatsoever. But let's say these morals did not exist. Let's say what I just told you is really not significant to today's debate. Let's look at why such a right is not acceptable in its essence in itself. And this is my second point. And this is where we look at individuals of importance to the society. We're talking about people, if you're the president or the secretary general of the United Nations. Let's look at some nuanced matter here. What we're going to talk about is the fact that when these people, if such a person were to decide that I want to end my life right now and I want to die, we cannot contest that because of the fact that this person will get legal backing because of the fact that it's a right. But why is it important for me to mention such people? Two reasons. One, because they have a duty to fulfill, because they took it upon themselves in the first place to do that, simply because, and this is why they simply choose to die, it's simply because it's too much work. Extensively, this is where we tell you that we stand by the principle of maximum utility. We utilize the resources that we have to better the society, and in this instance, these very same people who are important are the utility that are the people we are supposed to utilize. But the second reason why they would die, choose to die, is because they did something wrong. For example, if Zuma was to commit fraud, the easy way out would be for him to choose to die. Why would we allow such a right to exist? Because there's no accountability, ladies and gentlemen. That is what we tell you. That is not the reality of the Constitution. We don't just give rights because of the fact that people had freedoms. The third thing I'm going to talk about is families. In many instances, people who are suicidal don't tell their families, and their families don't necessarily know. And that's what actually happens. And this is where we look at the type of people who choose to commit suicide. We're talking about people who are under pressure, people who constantly go through bullying over and over again, ladies and gentlemen. And this is something that builds up, ladies and gentlemen, and isn't something that is just decided at once. We tell you government has the obligation in this instance to try and redress the very same situation. In this instance, they give these people a very same right to not even, they give the government no chance to actually do something about it, ladies and gentlemen, which is something that is morally desirable in the modern age that we live in right now, ladies and gentlemen. They don't do anything about it. Extensively, my first speaker told you about the fact that children have rights as well. What does this do to families? This means that parental obligations are then dismissed when we have this right. This means that these parents look bad in the eyes of government, and government already is bad by giving this right in itself, ladies and gentlemen. This right in itself, I would simply say that it deconstructs the social constructs that we put together as society. We don't necessarily think that this is beneficial for the world. The last thing I'm going to talk about is crime. And my first speaker touched on it a lot, and I'm going to extend on it. We tell you that in the instance where there's a criminal act in an instance, for example, there are two people in a room, I shoot the other person, I say to the judge that this person wanted to die. I cannot be prosecuted for this because they had the right to die. Extensively, suicide bombers, you can't hold them accountable again, ladies and gentlemen, because what? You're going to hold the pieces which are left, the intestines, ladies and gentlemen, accountable. You can't do that. That's not the reality of how justice works. This right is not applicable to any constitution.
Amongst many things, the biggest error that they've done is completely mischaracterizing the reason why we have rights, completely mischaracterizing the function of rights, and completely mischaracterizing just how people play out in society and when you get to a point when you decide to commit suicide. If they had dealt specifically with those realities, we wouldn't be having such a messy opposition case. What are two issues that came up in this debate? The first one, based on principal justification and which side wins that exchange. I'll prove to you how we won it by a landslide. But secondly, the minor issue on outcomes. But before that, let's deal with something that's very important, and that's the principal justification. And maybe if Linder hears it, they'll actually respond to it because they need to hear it like twice. Firstly, we told you that people deserve that kind of autonomy to fulfill whatever they desire. We made it very specifically clear when we told you that life and humans in their nature are incredibly subjective. What that meant was you cannot attach objectivities to humans. You cannot give humans aspirations. You cannot tell a human that this is the ideal life. That was analysis that was made very clear in our first proposition, proposition speech. And it's one of the most important facets of your humanity. They really needed to deal with that principle directly to get a foothold in this debate, but they didn't. What they did give us was like a bunch of counter assertions in Khula's first speech, where she firstly like disrespected you by just telling us, well, autonomy is limited. She did not tell us firstly when it is limited and to what metric it is limited. We didn't get any analysis. We kind of got it in PK's speech, where he tells us that we need to fulfill some kind of maximum utility, but I'll get to it once I deal with his speech. The second like weird justification they give us was this concept of like social contract. Two responses. Firstly, social contract isn't forced onto you. You can opt out of that social contract. What that means for their case is that you're not obliged to follow it each and every single time. You can opt in and out of that social contract. It's not that important. But secondly, that social contract begins with government fulfilling whatever will you have, ladies and gentlemen. That social contract starts with you. They need to fulfill your desires first. So if they're like vouching for social contract, they're way off it. So the third assertion that she tells us is that, well, the right to death isn't like contingent on other rights, and we want people to live a good life. Another big problem with them is that they've continuously placed this arbitrary concept of an objectively good life and objective goods on subjective human beings. We tell you that if you want to die, then die, because you see it as important to your life, not to Khula, Lindo, or PK's life. They're way off it. They're very arbitrary. And the next like counter-assertive harm that they give us was this harm of like, there's no accountability. Ooh, Shem. Let's cry because there's no accountability measures. She gave us like no analysis as to why it's so bad that we don't have any kind of accountability. And if it was some kind of principle, that they were vouching for, that principle is contingent on there being some kind of outcomes. They didn't give us that outcome. We cannot believe in that principle, ladies and gentlemen. Then so we tell you that principally they're just off it. But the main principle that they did like substantiate a bit was this idea of states being obliged to make sure that your life is intact and make sure that to protect your life. Here's where they get the analysis on rights very, very wrong. Because rights, ladies and gentlemen, are there to maximize freedoms. That's why we get freedom to that's why we get freedom to choose religion. That's why we get to ensure that we have the freedom to choose whatever life that we want to, i.e. Western liberal democracies. They know that very well. They know that in Western liberal democracies, you're meant to give that the rights that are enshrined are meant to give people liberty no matter what. What we tell you is that their entire concept of rights and the reasons why they're there were completely straw-manned. You cannot stand by that principle. Second, what we tell you is that rights are there and states are there to maximize on freedom. That's why rights are there. Don't straw-man it. But secondly, though, we think that like the entire case on government obligation is pretty flawed, because once you get to a point where you want to kill yourself, it means that government has failed at giving that obligation in the first place. What does that mean for their case, ladies and gentlemen? It means that they can't vouch for a principle that's already failed them. Their only stance is to stand for a side that gives them that alternative. We think that if government has failed at fulfilling that obligation because you want to kill yourself, we cannot stand by that principle anyway. Go.
What you don't understand is that this debate is not about validating committing suicide. This debate is about why we should make it a right that governments are
Okay, Khula, we should make it a right because rights are there to maximize freedom. There we go. Next. Thirdly, though, we tell you that like government obligations, we tell you that government obligations don't limit on people's freedoms. So what we tell you is that when government have specific obligations to fulfill certain things, they don't use people or limit people's freedoms. We don't see governments like forcing people to move into RDPs, move into public hospitals, because or not like buy private property, because we don't think that government obligation ever limits people's freedom. In fact, that's like their biggest obligation. We think that if you're vouching for state obligation, you're pretty much losing. And lastly, she tells us that while these rights are going to become like redundant, we still don't have a harm to that. But secondly, all the rights don't really mean much once you die or by getting told you that. But then lastly, on a counter-assertive harm, where she tells us that we open doors for people to frame you. Okay, you can frame people in every other single crime. We don't stop prosecuting crimes. We don't give away people's rights just because there's a potential of you framing people. But secondly, we don't base it on like minority what-ifs. We think that on our side you get far more better outcomes. Sit down. Then what we get from PK's speech in terms of outcomes is are these outcomes where he tells us that we restrict the ability for people to like live whatever life that they want to, and we restrict them from getting out of their state of strife. We told you again that you still haven't fully grasped the reality of people. And when they get to the suicide, it means that it's their final countdown. That means that all those other things of making their lives better just don't exist anymore. But lastly, he tells us that while important people might die, and we like stand for utility and things like that, we tell you that utility is an arbitrary concept because humans are subjective. Humans find different things important. That's why we cannot stand for a principle like utility in today's debate. That lastly, you don't usually get like those important indunas committing suicide anyway. We think that your harm just doesn't exist. Primarily, what opposition needed to do in this debate, ladies and gentlemen, is give you serious principle justification as to why they value human life. We tell you that all of their justifications have failed and their outcomes are not worth considering. We stand by a side that values autonomy. We stand by the side that values the Constitution and its function of being there in the first place. Proposition is taking today's debate.
On the grounds that they have set this debate, of course it is okay to say that death is therefore okay because life inherently has no value. However, ladies and gentlemen, that is not the truth in today's debate. The truth, ladies and gentlemen, is the exact reason why every single state in the world has the explicit obligation to protect any and every life. Because life, ladies and gentlemen, is simply not meaningless. Two questions that I'll use to analyze today's debate. Firstly, is the right to die a principally just right? So the first thing that we then address here is this idea of autonomy, because inherently what Tepo tells us is that free autonomy, ladies and gentlemen, is particularly what they get from this once we actually support the right to die being an actual thing. But now, first of all, the first response that we tell you, that autonomy, ladies and gentlemen, still exists even if the right to die does not exist. Because autonomy can still be achieved if we grant you the legal permission to kill yourself, for example, with euthanasia. We do not need the right to die for people to actually choose to die, especially if the condition allows for them to actually die, right? The second thing that we then, the second response that I then give you here, and basically this is where their analysis on full autonomy is simply contingent upon granting the right to do anything you want without consequence. Therefore, this means that there should be no matrix to exist to evaluate whether or not a right to good, whether or not that particular act is good or bad, right? So the first response that we give you here is that with that analysis, under their very same point, under the very same death that they're defending, we simply cannot value death as a legal or rather a legitimate or rather a justified choice itself, because we can't measure its morality as an act. So, ladies and gentlemen, what then also is the purpose of the right to death if we just do things without properly contemplating the consequences at the end of the day? But now on the second response, we generally say no. We reject that analysis. We generally tell you that the morality of an action is actually deemed, the morality of an action is actually justified by its outcome. So if the outcome of you wanting to kill yourself is therefore unjust, the state, ladies and gentlemen, therefore cannot in fact grant you the legal permission to actually kill yourself at the end of the day. For example, in a state where that particular death within itself is actually meaningless, right? Is actually meaningless, or harms other individuals. For example, in instances of like suicide bombers, right? But now, ladies and gentlemen, we also then tell you here that basically what we conclude here basically is that if the morality of an act, right, has a rather negative consequence, we therefore cannot deem it as something that is justified. However, the reason why this analysis is particularly important is because whether or not we like it, we are born into the social contract theory. You automatically forfeit your rights to government to make decisions for you. So you cannot just say you want to do things without properly contemplating the consequences. We do so because it is important. But in a moment, I'll tell you why the social contract is particularly important in this debate. And this is then, sit down, and this is then where we address this point on why should states actually support this, right? Or rather why it's within the obligation of the state to do this. And basically, this is because they want the state to stop stopping people from killing themselves. So in the first response, we tell you that we actually value the state intervening because it enables the state, ladies and gentlemen, and because it actually enables the state to mitigate the matter at the end of the day. This is because, unlike what proposition believes, people don't just kill themselves for reasons that are absolutely good and progressive. People are inherently selfish, but people are also irrational. This means that people are not always in a state where they make decisions that are simply beneficial or rather objectively good for everyone in society at the end of the day. What this therefore means, ladies and gentlemen, is that we always need a government to act as a mediator and to intervene and act by doing what is objectively good, not only for that individual, but for society as a whole. But furthermore, this means that we need the state to intervene to protect us from ourselves because we don't always make the rational decisions, right? So therefore, ladies and gentlemen, why we actually have this is exactly why we have the social contract theory, social contract between government and its people, in order for people to forfeit their rights to government, for government to act by doing what's this overall best for them at the end of the day. This then brings me to the third idea under this. Before I proceed, yes.
Your only contention against morality is that we need to consider the outcomes. We tell you that the goodness and badness of outcomes is arbitrary and subjective. You need to define why it's objective.
But it's not necessarily subjective. Because one, if the act actually does harm you, the point that it is harmful and the morality is therefore unjustified. If the act harms other individuals, the point is that that very same action within itself is harmful to other individuals. And this is something that is objectively defined by the state, hence the social contract, right? Cool. So this then brings me to this third idea where they tell us that, you know what, guys, screw this, life is meaningless, and therefore we can't give humans some sort of aspiration. One, this is a subjective observation of what life is. You choose to believe that life is meaningless. The second thing that we tell you, ladies and gentlemen, is that the other observation is that life, you don't just get the value of life by the virtue of living. The purpose of life is to live to gain that very same value within itself. So which observation do we then value in today's debate? We value our observation. You know why? Because we still get their benefits. The point of life is that dying is inevitable. So if you really do find life meaningless, you will die eventually. It's okay. What we do is that we allow people to get the chance to continue to try to find that meaning regardless. That's the life that we value because we then better uphold the purpose of life under our model. Sit down. The last thing that I'm going to address under this is something that they completely failed to do and only responded to in such a fickle way in a response to a POI. Because this debate was about whether or not should this actually be a right that we support. And they're like, yeah, because the purpose of rights is to grant freedoms. What the heck? Listen, if death is therefore a right, it means that all of those freedoms that you guys say the purpose of rights is to actually protect, therefore become absolutely meaningless. You don't have the freedom to anything. You don't have the right to education. You don't have the right to anything. You know why? Because dying becomes equivalent, or rather a substitute to living. That simply means that dying, ladies and gentlemen, is therefore is equally valuable to living. But moreover, ladies and gentlemen, we can't necessarily maximize all of these other rights and freedoms that rights themselves are actually supposed to protect at the end of the day. Ladies and gentlemen, we do not support the right to death if it simply contradicts the value of all the other rights as well as the values of the Constitution. We simply reject this. This then nicely brings me to my second question, right? So generally what we conclude here is that basically what we conclude under the first question is that because the right to death simply devalues, the right to death simply devalues other rights, but moreover, ladies and gentlemen, because we cannot give a subjective endorse this definition of the value of life. We therefore do not support it. This then brings me to my second question. And the second question here is, why is dying comparatively better when it is not a right? So the first thing that we then tell you here, ladies and gentlemen, is that one, we can place a metric as to whether or not dying, in fact, as to whether or not to die, in fact, is justified. So, for example, when you're in a vegetative state and you want to commit euthanasia, we can set a metric there. The government can easily allow you to kill yourself because it is, in fact, what seems desirable and justified at that point. But secondly, ladies and gentlemen, we are therefore more open to intervention. And here we don't want to reject intervention. We actually think that it's necessary. Because often people commit suicide and kill themselves without even trying to get help because they think that they cannot be helped out of the situations. The sad thing is that families are left behind without even knowing what the problem inherently was to begin with. When we don't allow people to just die easily, we are better able to address those problems and actually rehabilitate them to see, in fact, a meaning in life. We value that status quo much more, right? But second, ladies and gentlemen, the state's obligation to better and improve your living conditions is therefore not taken away. Because when people die, when people are self-immolating themselves, when refugees are killing themselves because they are refused asylum, we therefore see an emergency to place pressure on government. That's the kind of state, ladies and gentlemen, that we want to live in, because this is actually used to place as some sort of imperative on government to act. We value this more. Thank you.
They say rights are there to maximize as well as give freedoms. What opposition has been saying over and over and over and over again is that some freedoms just aren't given, ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, we've been trying to say to you that freedom can be limited. And this is where we come to the idea of the social contract theory, which they were talking about, saying that people can opt out of it. That is a lie. You cannot opt out of the social contract theory. This is something where the government can limit your choice, ladies and gentlemen, in the instance where you've harmed another individual, or in an instance where your rights cannot be, you cannot be held accountable in that very same situation. That is what the social contract theory is, and you cannot opt out of it. Let's talk about the issues that came up in today's debate, but before we get there, let's ask the simple question to summarize today's debate and what it came down to. It was simple. It was basically what the state ought to do in today's debate, and that is what it generally came down to. And the first thing we need to tell you before I move on is the fact that the morality of an act is actually judged by its consequences, and that is what we've been continuously saying. Let's analyze what this actually means. We said in our first point, it actually makes what happens when something is actually a right. And here we told you, in an instance where we give you the right to die, it then becomes equivalent to the right to life, ladies and gentlemen. This was something that was not responded to. But why was this point important? This simply means that we cannot question any motive that you have in an instance where you decide to die. In an instance where you say, now I want to die, ladies and gentlemen, we cannot do anything about it because you then get legal backing, which is the point of today's debate. Debating the fact that this is then made a right in the first place, which is what they missed from the beginning in today's debate. The second thing I'm going to talk about is this whole idea of things that are generally objective. And this came down to choice. What is basically objectively good and what is basically objectively bad. And this came down to the fact that everybody has different morals. Yes, that is true, but what opposition kept on telling you is that when something is harmful, it is harmful. You cannot change it no matter what you say. In an instance where you say we actually have different views, in an instance where you say we have objectively good and bad views of things. When something is harmful to an individual, it is harmful, you cannot change it. If a suicide bomber says, I choose to die, and I go bomb a mall of people, the harm there is the fact that you've killed people. But because you had that right, we cannot question your motives. That is the basis of today's debate in the first place, which came down to rationality, which is something they did, was something that they themselves did not consider. We spoke about a couple of things. One, the fact that the types of people that choose to commit suicide. And in the instance of families, ladies and gentlemen, many people within those very same families don't necessarily tell the families the problems that exist. We just see someone dying at the end of the day. We tell you what the government ought to do in today's debate, then relating back to the question is the fact that government is supposed to better the situation that is at hand in today's debate, which is their obligation in the first place. When you are living in poverty and when you've been bullied or something and when your self-esteem has been harmed, the government's obligation is to redress that particular situation. When we allow this to be a right, ladies and gentlemen, we don't necessarily give government the chance to do that because you then have that legal backing that we've been talking about over and over again. But what opposition came and told us in today's debate was a couple of things. The first one being that the state has the obligation to allow for freedoms. We told you that freedoms are limited because in many instances they harm other individuals, and extensively we limit this particular right because in itself you cannot get accountability. The second thing we told you about what they said under the instance where government cannot should stop stopping you from committing suicide and choosing to die, we told you that that is something that government cannot do, ladies and gentlemen, because government has a duty to better everyone's life. We told you the purpose of life is to better yourself and aim to find the reason to live. And secondly, ladies and gentlemen, we told you that when you die and when you choose to die, ladies and gentlemen, the very same rights and freedoms that they stand for don't necessarily exist anymore, ladies and gentlemen. This is a right that cannot exist in the modern society, ladies and gentlemen. Some rights aren't right. Some rights are wrong.
The only debate side opposition wins is the debate about whether or not we should allow individuals to, whilst killing themselves, kill other people. That is the only ground by which they say that killing is principally unjustified. That's the only ground by which they say that killing yourself is harmful. In that debate, they're winning it. The actual debate, we're winning it. But before I show you that, a few things in terms of strategic areas. The first one, this idea of the criteria. So Kula goes on to reject our criteria and say, well, it's generic. We say it's generic because it's always true. He doesn't run the analysis as to why their criteria should be valued over ours, but secondly, why it's mutually exclusive. We say that join those two criteria, we still have one that fulfills all those grounds. One, the idea of necessity. We say that human beings would like to kill themselves if their lives are bad. Two, if they see death as an aspiration. Three, if they see it as a means to an end. So yeah, death is necessary, we fulfill their criteria. But the second thing that they want to tell us is that if it's in the best interest of state, but I'll deal with that in my matter. So, principal exchange in this debate. What did you hear from proposition? One, we tell you, why is autonomy justified? What do you hear from the opposition bents? They say autonomy can be limited. The problem here is that they don't tell you why in this particular context autonomy should be limited. The inherent argument they make is that it is limited if you are bombing other people. We say like killing yourself doesn't always need to be that you kill other people, right? But secondly, we'd say that the only other ground which they say they can limit freedom is if you are making objectively bad decisions. This is the same government that allow people to have the worst haircuts ever and say ruin their social identity. We say bad decisions alone, because of their arbitrary nature, means that government don't limit autonomy on the basis of decisions being bad. That is not a criteria, right? So what else do we tell you, right? We'd say that goodness is arbitrary, and that means that the standard by which government limits autonomy, that is whether or not decision is good, is arbitrary, and we get rid of that. If it's arbitrary, it means it's unfair, it means it can't be applied fairly, it's not something that we're willing to uphold. The second thing that we tell you is that why we think that the decision what are the objectively standards by which you should limit people's autonomy? One, when there's lack of consent. Two, when there's when they limit other people's freedoms. Three, when you shouldn't, and then we tell you that you shouldn't impose a metric on decisions. The idea of consent, we told you, those are the only arbitrary means by which a government can limit people's freedom. We say that it is not that decisions are bad, it is those things, especially in that instance, governments don't limit your freedom because your family is going to catch feelings if you do something they don't like. They do it because if a decision you take limits the freedom of other people, it is harmful, and by that basis they limit your autonomy. We say that here you don't limit other people's freedom. They might not like your decision, but that is not a ground by which you do not make decisions about your own life. Very proud to propose that model. The second thing we talk about is state obligation. This is perhaps one of the arguments that was exaggerated in its extent in this debate. We'd say that state obligation means that the government has the obligation to maximize your freedom. We'd say that when the ability to kill yourself is not an absolute right, I told you in my speech, that means that parents can continue to take their children to psychiatric analysis because they think that their children are about to kill themselves. That was in my speech, that when it's not an absolute right, government does not have the direct obligation to defend it to the maximum. They say they want to give people that freedom. They say they wouldn't prosecute it they wouldn't do, they would allow you, they wouldn't prosecute it and whatnot. We'd say, why not take it as far as guaranteeing it absolutely? What rights give you beyond just policies and rules is absolutism, a guarantee of government protecting those rights. We'd say that that's something that we're very proud to stand on. This idea they give us, social contract. What do we say here? We'd say that social contract, by definition, because they don't do this, is that government does things that are in your best interest. We say a maximization of your freedoms is in your best interest. So yeah, we do fulfill social freedom. But secondly, we'd say that you have the ability to opt in and out of social freedom. They say, well, you were born into social contract. What do we tell you? We say you're allowed to do things like get your own lawyer because state lawyers are bad. You're allowed to buy your own house because an RDP is inadequate. You can opt out of social contract. I've never been prouder to propose.
For coming through today. This is the final event, the Constitution Hill Debating League, and this is the award ceremony where we get to crown and when we get to see who exactly will be, what's the word? I'm looking for the word. Sorry? Who will be claiming victory to being the champion of the Constitution Hill Debating League? It is here where we'll find out who wins the final. I'd like to call order to the House. And it is also here that we will be finding out who performed well in the top 10 Speaker Awards section of the afternoon. Just one last request again. Let's just try to minimize talking. Let's minimize movement. And also just keep your phones on silent. So my name is Doors Mbonani, and I am the project coordinator of Constitution Hill Debating League. And 6 years later, this tournament is really exciting. We're seeing some really interesting schools. But not only are we seeing our schools performing well here, we're also seeing all our schools performing well, even at the Gauteng Schools Debating Board. And I think that is something really, really noteworthy, and it actually shows that we're doing quite a lot of work as the Constitution Hill Debating League. And for that, let's just give a round of applause to Con Hill. I will not be spending too much time talking, and equally I will request that the 4 or 5 speeches that we have lined up do not consume too much time in their presentations. I will request that we keep the speeches to 2 minutes. If it's a long speech, please let it be 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Okay, so just to give you time to wrap up your own speech, and just so that we get through this program as quick as we possibly can. Without wasting further time, we'll get our first speaker, and that is a representative from SciFac. That's Professor David Bilschitz.
Fiona Mutesi was born in an informal settlement in Uganda in 1996. Her father died of HIV/AIDS when she was 3, and very soon after that, she lost her older sister, Julia. At the age of 9, she couldn't continue at her school because her family couldn't afford to send her anymore. Every day, she would sell maize with her brother, until just one day, she stumbled upon an after-school program which invited her to play chess. Mutesi was a brilliant talent, and very soon, with her coach's encouragement, she went back to school. At the age of 14, she became the junior girls champion of Uganda. At the age of 16, she became a candidate master of chess, recognized internationally for her amazing talent, becoming the first of 2 titled female players in Uganda's history. From a tragic beginning in grinding poverty, Mutesi, with discipline and dedication, has developed global fame. Her story is now the subject of a film which has just opened in South African cinemas called Queen of Katwe, which I recommend many of you go and see. Now, I start with Fiona's story as I believe it is deeply inspiring for all of us, but it is particularly relevant for today's finals of the Constitution Hill Debating Tournament. The tournament aims to do 2 important things. Firstly, to educate learners in South African schools about our Constitution, and in particular about our Bill of Rights. And secondly, to develop debating skills amongst our learners. Why do we do these things? For good reason, because each is central to ensuring that in South Africa, we cannot only have one Fiona Mutesi, but millions of people who can realize their talents and dreams. Why do I say this? The first goal of learning about our Constitution and rights is crucial. The Constitution is the document upon which South Africans agreed 20 years ago as the foundation of our new society. The Constitution importantly contains a promise, a recognition that never again will our society be one in which people are discriminated against on the basis of their race, their sex, their gender, their sexual orientation, or any other ground. The Constitution also creates a vision of a different type of future, a future in which every person has adequate housing, sufficient food, adequate health care, and a decent education. We know that we have not yet achieved these ideals and goals, but the Constitution keeps our minds focused on those goals and invites you, as the incredibly talented young people of South Africa, to help us realize the dream that it puts before us. The Constitution also includes values of openness, transparency, and that government must be exercised in the interests of the people. Many of you will see at the moment people in positions of power who are misusing their positions. We need together to say clearly, hands off our Constitution, hands off the money in our country which is earmarked for the development of our people, and hands off the law which is being used for evil political ends. The second goal of the tournament is to improve and develop the debating skills of all those who take part. Why is that important? Well, debating, as you know, allows us to construct arguments for the positions we believe in. And as you will have learned, it's sometimes difficult to do. Also, debating requires us to think very much about the arguments of the other side. Now, I was sitting and very happy to hear both finals. I was on the adjudication panel of the senior panel, and I have two important comments to many of you, right? The first is, please breathe when you speak. Everyone, so many speakers ran from beginning to end without a breath virtually, okay? Please breathe when you speak. It's more effective. Have a look at Barack Obama. He's a great orator, right? He breathes, he takes his time. It's very crucial to have time, and it allows you to think as well about your argument, right? And secondly, there is a difference between argument and rhetoric, okay? Sometimes a lot of people say, this is it, I reject this, etc., but you have to actually provide arguments, okay? And the panels, okay, and the panels, we had a big discussion about the different arguments that were put forward by the different sides and which were the stronger arguments. That's what's going to win the debate at the end of the day. Debating is essential to our Constitution and constitutional democracy. In a democracy, you cannot force people to agree with you. You have to persuade them with the force of your argument. The means you use to achieve your goal matter in a constitutional democracy. And if you use illegitimate means, it undermines your cause. So here I'm going to make a controversial argument, okay? But one I think that needs to be made, that what we see on university campuses at the moment is extremely troubling. And it goes against our constitutional democratic values to try to force people to agree with you and to use violence, intimidation, and destruction of property as a means to achieve certain goals. It also undermines the very cause which you stand for. The only way in which we can create a future of accessible education for all is to debate, to discuss, what do we want education to achieve in our society? How can we ensure everyone can gain access to it? And how do we do so in a manner that is just and does not prejudice those without a university education? These are difficult questions, and we need to find a common approach in South Africa that will help provide opportunities to all who can go to university, whilst addressing the many other problems in our society. Now, as you can hear, I'm from the University of Johannesburg, and I run a research institute called SIFAC, the South African Institute for Advanced Constitutional, Public, Human Rights, and International Law. We have been a partner in the Constitutional Debating Tournament since its beginning, and I'm very proud of its growth and development. It was wonderful to see the final senior debate today, where I thought the standard was exceptionally high, and it's actually, I've seen a growth and improvement in the standard over the years. I would also like to thank the Claude Leon Foundation, who have generously helped to sponsor the competition for the past several years. The other sponsors from the government, the Gauteng government, and of course Constitution Hill for its stewardship of the competition, excellent stewardship, and Dawn and Ruben and many other people who involved in the competition, and Tahuti for running the competition. We are also particularly proud of you, the learners, and we hope that you have learned a lot from the competition and that it has helped to enhance your skills. I want to congratulate the winners, the runners-up, and all those who have participated in the competition. You show the way to a shining future in our country. South Africa's riches lie in its people and in their ethics. You all have wonderful futures ahead. As a lawyer, I hope many of you will become the leading attorneys, advocates, judges, and academics in the future. And of course, will go into many other important professions. I would also love to see many of you at the University of Johannesburg in a few years' time as my students, and those of other lecturers. The important thing is to have discipline, focus, and to use your talents to better yourself and the country. I hope that you will use your debating skills to advance the values of our Constitution and take the opportunities you have to better yourselves and our country. Like the Queen of Katwe, Fiona Mutesi, who I started with, the sky is the limit for you. Now go ahead and fly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. And we just want to say thank you again to SciFac for your continued contribution in this wonderful project. Next up, we will get a representative from the Department of Economic Development, Advocate Fati Memela.
Good afternoon and thanks, everybody. All protocol observed. I've got 2 minutes and 30 seconds, ne? Thanks. And I must breathe, I must speak slowly. I think the professor has actually wrapped it up very nicely, and he has touched on most of the things that I actually wanted to touch. So I'm not going to repeat what he said. We endorse and we value this relationship with Constitutional Hill. I think it started 2 years ago. I come from the office that is called the Consumer Affairs Office, which is a division within the Department of Economic Development. Part of the work that we do is to ensure that consumers know their rights and responsibilities. And consumer protection starts at this level of learners, so that the seed that we actually plant would nurture the other kind of information that we want to actually transmit to members of the public. So students are a very good vehicle to transmit that information. The debate is not about just arguing and debating, but that information must sit within your mind, within your conscience, and you must transmit that information to your peers, to your friends, to your uncles, to your fathers, to your brothers and sisters. So we value this relationship with Constitutional Hill solely because consumer rights are human rights. So we plug in there in the broader scheme of things of, the constitutionality of, everything that, the law, derives its function from. So we plug in there as Consumer Affairs Office to sort of entrench this culture of consumer rights being human rights. We are established in terms of Schedule 4 of the Constitution, which gives the provinces and the national government the mandate and the authority to make laws that would protect consumers. So we are there because of the Constitution actually has given us the mandate, or given the Department of Economic Development the mandate to establish consumer protection offices. So we have clubbed together with Constitutional Hill, I think 2 years ago, because they were running this debate in respect of the Constitution, and we were running a parallel debate in terms of consumer rights being human rights. And we saw it fit that we should actually put them together and run one single program that would actually cater for both areas. So we endorse it, we are very happy about it, and we wish all the learners all the best. I think the debates were very insightful and very, very sharp, and I wish you very well, and thank you very much. Thanks.
Once more, thank you very much to the Department of Economic Development. You will remember from last year, we had them attending quite a lot of the sessions, coming to do workshops, just coming to observe. And once again this year, we had the pleasure of having them at Wits University, remember, on training day. And also, you will remember that we had a debate about informal traders. We also had a debate about people's private information. And if you were at the workshop, you will remember that those were some of the issues that we engaged with. And that's the reason why we actually had those topics, was because of the Department of Economic Development. So not only were you guys focusing on the Constitution, but if you guys remember again from what I just told you, you actually did cover quite a lot of areas around economic development and in particular consumer rights. So once more, thank you very much to the Department of Economic Development. Now, I think we've had quite a lot of speeches so far. Quite a lot has been said. So before we move on to the last two speeches, we will now give the awards for the top 10 best speakers. I will ask that we have perhaps up Professor Bilches. Let's have the advocate, and can we also have the CEO from the Constitution Hill? Thank you so much to everyone for working so hard. The next awards are just go towards recognizing those individuals that have performed excellently, and those individuals that continue to work hard in improving their debating skills. In 9th place, so let me just explain quickly. There's a joint 7th position, so there's no number 10, and so the awards will start at number 9. In 9th place is Topiwa Patile from Basa Tutorial College. Right? So Topiwa is not here. That's all right. We'll make sure that she gets her award. In 8th place is Lindiwe Mutloung from Letsukutsula. Letsukutsula could not come today, so we'll also be making sure that they get their awards later. Same goes to position number 7 from Letsukutsula, that's Sambulo Mkunu. In 7th place, so Sambulo is the first joint 7th. The next joint 7th is Natasha Rasuke from Basa Tutorial College, and I believe she's not here as well. In 6th place is Tabile Kubeka from Esokwazi. Her award should be accepted by Mr. Tsakane from the Val. Mr. Tsakane? If Mr. Tsakane is not here, can we have Rachel to come up to accept the award? Oh, there's Mr. Tsakane. We have Vanessa Shipalane from Ward School Yantatlak. I got an apology as well for them. I will ask Miss Gugu from Townview to accept this award on their behalf. these are the next 3 top speakers. Unfortunately, their teacher had a funeral, and so they couldn't send the kids without any supervision. So they've requested that we nevertheless make the announcement, and then they'll arrange to receive their certificates later. So I'll call out all 3 of them, starting from number 3, number 2, and number 1, and then we'll clap only after number 1, just so that we save time. In 3rd place is Sakile Mabena. In 2nd place, Lubuto Mwape. And in 1st place, Tobile Msiza. All 3 of them are from the African School for Excellence. So in the senior division, in 10th place, from Banato Park, Eric Kazadi. From Bupilo Impilo, in 9th place, is Nsigilelo Barnabas. From Bupilo Impilo, in 2nd place, from Randfontein High School, Agisang Sibanda. In 1st place, to receive one of the silver trophies there. Yeah. From Randfontein High School, Obakeng Siachen. Congratulations to all those speakers for performing so well, and I hope that you guys enjoy those shining medals and those trophies. Can you just give them one more round of applause? Two more speeches, right? That's like 5 minutes of speeches, and then we'll all be going home. So can we get, please, Mr. Logan Govender from an organization called Save the Children?
Good afternoon, everyone, especially the young debaters. What an honor for me to be with you today. Just a small correction. Save the Children is an international organization, as many of you will probably know. I'm actually from Save the Children South Africa, which was recently established in 2013. But Save the Children has been active in South Africa for a long time. But it really is an honor for me to be here today, because firstly, it reminds me of when I was in school. And, you know, I took part in a few debates in my time, a long time ago. But the one thing I can say is that I'm really glad that in my days, we did not encounter the quality of debates and debaters that I've witnessed today. Because I think my team would have lost all the time, every time. I really admired the high levels of confidence that everyone who I saw today came up to the stage and displayed. And there were some other standouts for me in terms of what people were saying, the content of the debates. I really enjoyed the use of contemporary examples when people spoke about the role of the public protector, drawing on examples from tragic situations around the world like Syria. And I particularly enjoyed the debate around the construct of the will of the people. That really stood out for me. But again, this is all very subjective. As many of the debaters reminded us, during the course of the debates. So I won't go any more on that path, but I'm sure they all appreciate and understand the point I'm making. The second privilege to be here is what Constitutional Hill represents to all of us in South Africa in terms of the progress we've made towards human rights and democracy. However, I do want to say, especially as someone who works for an organization called Save the Children, that there are huge challenges that we still face, especially in terms of realizing the rights of all children, especially the most vulnerable and poorest of children in our country and all over the world. And in this regard, I want to encourage all of us, especially the youth, to keep this in mind in the days and years ahead. Now at Save the Children South Africa, there are some programs that really relate to what Constitutional Hill represents. And one of them is annually we host the Children's Parliament. The latest one was held last week in Mahikeng in Northwest Province. And I think almost every one of the young debaters here would do that Parliament proud whenever we host it. So do keep it in mind for future activities in your diaries. And the other thing I would like to mention is in a number of our education projects, the thing that we are encouraging very, very strongly is the notion of establishing children's committees in all schools so that the voice of children can be heard more strongly in terms of children's rights and what they are entitled to as young citizens of the country. So with those few words, I want to wish you all well in your future endeavors and careers. All the best and good luck. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Govender. I think this is the time that we've all been waiting for. We will be announcing who won in the respective divisions. And I just want to say congratulations to all the teams that spoke today. And I wish you all the luck in the world. So let's get the adjudicator from the junior final, the chair from the junior final, Thabo, to give us a brief summary of the debate as well as the outcome of that debate. And I like literally mean like brief.
Thank you, Ntokozo. Greetings once more. Guys, my name is Thabo Mgadi and I was the chair for the junior division in the Constitutional Hill Debating League 2016. And in my panel, I had Sandile, I had Linda, and I had Katlego. So, well, thing is that they didn't even prep to give a general overview of the debate, but I'll just give you guys the results. Right, cool. So we unanimously agreed that, before, in proposition we had Townview, and then in opposition we had Rosefield. So we unanimously agreed that the team that we're going to be crowning as the Constitutional Hill Debating League 2016 champions is opposition Rosefield.
Sorry, and the trophy. That's it. Yes. We also have the runner-ups from the junior semi-final. You guys will just get a young certificate. Picture?
Okay, thank you very much. I didn't comb my hair. No, I didn't comb my hair, sorry. So, In the senior final, so on the panel, I was the chair. We had Rachel, we had Silo, we had Professor Blitzwitz. We also had, am I forgetting someone? The panel? Okay. No, we also had Mrs. Banda, sorry, yes, Mrs. Banda, right? Thank you very much. It was a really interesting final. 3-2 split. That means 3 judges and 2 other judges. The winning team is Proposition 914.
This is a very important person. If you want to know what Conhill is, if you want to know whose shoe is the loudest, this is Conhill. From the gates to everywhere, to this stage, this podium, this mic. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Ignore him. I'm going to do my, was it 1 minute and 30 seconds? 2 minutes and 30 seconds. My job is just to say thank you to everybody. I want to start off by saying thank you to all the schools that participated, to the teachers that got involved in tutoring and training and debating. You guys were absolutely mind-blowing. I had fortunate enough to arrive in time for the senior debate, and I really, really was blown away. So thank you, everybody, and congratulations to everybody. I think our country is going to be fine with young people like you good at the head. I also want to say a big, big thank you to our partners, particularly SciFec and the professor at the back. I didn't have to give a speech because he's just summed it up also very nicely. Our other funders as well, the Claude Leon Foundation, who couldn't be here today, but thank you to them as well for supporting us, and particularly our sister department within our flagship mothership, the Department of Economic Development, the Consumer Affairs Division, headed up by the great advocate. Thank you so much for getting involved in this. Thank you for helping us to grow this over the last few years. Watch this space. Next year is going to be bigger and better, and the prizes are even going to be bigger and better. So I'd like to encourage all of you to start getting ready to do this again. And lastly, I want to thank my team led by Ruben and Lerato for a job really well done. You guys have been running around now for many months with this, and this is your baby. You've managed to grow it to what it is today, and we're very, very proud of it, as well as Tahuti and the project managers from Tahuti that have supported us as well. Thank you so much for really doing a great job and making this tournament what it has become today. And then lastly, I just want to say a very, very special thank you to some of the ladies sitting here in the front. I'm not sure whether you young debaters are aware that you are in the women's jail. And sitting here and having listened to you today and are some of the ex-women prisoners who were actually incarcerated in this prison. And I want to ask them just to stand up for 1 minute and let's just give them a round of applause for what they've done so that you guys and us can have the freedom that we have today. Ladies, please, if you can just stand up for a minute. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. Please travel safely back home, and we look forward to seeing you again next year.
Last but not least, my thank yous. 74 teams later, 237 speakers later. Thank you so much. Like managing 74 teams. So that's 74 by 5 kids. So that also means plus 74 teachers. And this year we've had over 40 adjudicators across the province. So having to respond to all of those demands and all of those needs is something that has been really, really hard. I do, however, want to say thank you so much to Tehusti Institute, firstly, for entrusting me with such a massive tournament. I don't think I would have done it without the support of the teachers themselves. It's been a really long journey, and I just want to say thank you to each and every one of the teachers that are here and those that are not here. So let's give the teachers a round of applause. Just as a sign of our appreciation, I am going to ask Itumeleng, the teacher from Rhodesfield, teacher from, I'm really sorry. Too many names, guys, I swear. The teacher from Townview, the teacher from Khokare, Freedom, all the teachers that are here. If you're a teacher and you've been accompanying the kids, please come up stage. We have some really nice Balmain things to give to you. Thank you so much for all the sacrifices that you guys constantly make every weekend to make sure that we all get to our various debating locations. Order. And importantly, thank you so much to the Department of Economic Development for sponsoring the teachers with those lovely goodies. They really appreciate it. I also just want to say thank you very much to Conhill. So I've already given you an idea of how hard it is to run such a tournament, and it's just really amazing to work with a team of dedicated people. So thank you very much, Ruben. Thank you, Lerato. And I know Faruane is not around, but thank you so much, and thank you so much, Ms. Robinson. Can we just give them a round of applause? I'm sorry I don't have Balmain goodies for you guys, but just be strong. Okay. Last but not least, I just want to say thank you to my coordinators. So one of them is not here. Just want to say thank you very much to Mfumo. From Katlehong, yes. Thank you so much to Mfumo's assistant. Mfumo likes things, so Mfumo has an assistant, and his assistant was Sandile, so thank you very much for holding it down. I also just want to make a quick recognition as well. I just want to say thank you so much to Dumisane and Rachel. They keep doing quite a lot of work behind the scenes. Quite a lot of the schools that we get from the VAL are schools which they bring into the league. They organize the venues for us. So thank you so much, guys, for all the hard work that you guys continue to put into this tournament. I think I've done enough thank yous. At this point, see you next year. I hope that you guys get ready. Prepare yourself. It's going to be bigger and it's going to be better. For myself, thank you so much, guys.